In 73 AD, high above the eastern shore of the Dead Sea, the fortress of Masada rose like a colossal sentinel from the Judean wilderness. Its cliffs jutted almost vertically into the sky, sheer walls of stone that no ordinary army could hope to climb. The stronghold was perched on a rhomboid-shaped mesa, roughly 550 meters in length and 270 meters across, protected on all sides by terrifying drops, 400 meters straight down on the eastern face, 90 meters on the western approach, and sharp, jagged cliffs on the north and south. Only a handful of narrow paths snaked their way to the summit, twisting and winding like serpents, each one easily defensible by a few determined men. At the top, a small but resolute band of Jewish rebels, the Sicarii, had entrenched themselves. These were not ordinary warriors, they were zealots, survivors of Jerusalem's fall in 70 AD, men and women who had chosen exile on a cliff rather than surrender. Their leader, Eleazar ben Yair, was a figure of fear and inspiration, a man whose presence alone could steel the hearts of defenders and unerringly intimidate attackers. From this heights, the Sicarii could watch far across the Dead Sea, monitoring trade routes and military movements through the harsh Judean wilderness below. Whoever held Masada controlled the eastern approach to Judea. Its position made it more than a fortress, it was a strategic keystone, a symbol of rebellion, and a sanctuary for those unwilling to bow to Roman rule. The fortress itself was a marvel of both military and architectural planning. Around its edges ran a 1,400-meter casemate wall, 4 meters thick and equally tall, punctuated by over 30 towers and 4 heavily fortified gates. The walls were a continuous line of stone armor, broken only by defensive positions that allowed archers to fire from cover while staying protected from enemy assault. Inside this perimeter, Masada functioned as a self-contained city. At the northern tip, palaces and terraces stretched along the cliffs, adorned with Roman-style frescoes and intricate mosaics. Bathhouses carved directly into the rock hinted at comfort and sophistication, even in this isolated stronghold. Storage was one of Masada's most remarkable features. The Sicarii understood the importance of endurance, and so they prepared. Over a dozen vast storerooms were stocked with as much as 2,700 tons of food, enough to withstand sieges that could last years. Water, the lifeblood of survival in the Judean desert, was managed with unmatched ingenuity. Rainwater collected from the mesa's slopes was funneled into massive cisterns, each carved into solid rock, capable of sustaining more than 1,000 people for up to 3 years. In such a harsh climate, these systems were the difference between life and death. The natural defenses alone made Masada nearly impregnable. Any attacking force faced narrow, winding paths that forced them into single file, exposing them to arrows, rocks, and fire from above. The cliffs themselves were almost vertical, and every effort to scale them would meet certain death. Siege engines, ladders, and ramps, the tools Rome had perfected for decades, were almost useless against the sheer geometry of the mesa. Masada was not just a fortress of stone, it was a fortress of terrain, planning, and human determination. Yet beyond its walls, the political significance of Masada was immense. After Jerusalem fell, the rebellion was not over. As long as Masada stood, the Sicarii held a beacon of resistance. The Romans could not allow this last pocket of defiance to exist unchecked. The fortress was a thorn in their side, a reminder that no matter how far their legions marched, there were those who would fight to the last breath. The Sicarii were radical, fearless, and prepared to die for their cause. To the Romans, this was no ordinary siege. It was a test of their most advanced military engineering, their patience, and their ability to subdue the unconquerable. Every approach to the mesa was deliberate and controlled. The 3 primary paths, the winding snake path, the northern spur, and the western approach, were narrow and treacherous, each flanked by sheer drops and natural choke points. Even a small number of defenders could hold these paths indefinitely. The Sicarii utilized this advantage expertly. They constructed barricades, dug trenches, and stockpiled weapons at every critical point. From the top, they could rain down destruction on any approaching force, using gravity and the cliffs themselves as tools of war. A single misstep could send soldiers plummeting to their deaths, turning nature into a deadly ally. Masada was more than a physical stronghold. It represented freedom, resilience, and the unbroken spirit of a people who had lost Jerusalem but refused to surrender. To the Romans, conquering Masada would require not just soldiers and siege engines, but innovation, patience, and a willingness to adapt to a challenge unlike any they had faced before. For the Sicarii, every day on the mesa was a test of courage, endurance, and faith. They understood the stakes: hold the fortress, and the rebellion lived; lose it, and the dream of an independent Judea would be extinguished. This was the stage on which one of the most remarkable sieges of ancient history would unfold. A fortress designed to defy armies, held by a few hundred determined men and women, looming above a desert that had witnessed centuries of conquest. And for Rome, the question loomed: how could they turn this almost impossible fortress into a battlefield, and how would their famed engineering overcome cliffs that seemed to mock even the mightiest legions? The challenge of Masada demanded more than ordinary soldiers. It required a general whose precision, discipline, and experience could match the fortress itself. Rome sent Lucius Flavius Silva, a man forged in the fires of siegecraft and political calculation. Silva was not chosen merely for rank or ancestry, though he hailed from a senatorial family in Urbisaglia, Italy, but for his proven ability to subdue the most stubborn rebellions. He had seen the aftermath of Jerusalem's fall, witnessed the devastation of cities, and understood the delicate balance of military victory and political authority. He arrived in Judea with a singular mission: to crush the last bastion of resistance and leave no doubt of Roman supremacy. With Silva marched Legio ex Fretensis, the 10th Legion, veterans of countless campaigns. This was a unit unlike any other in the Roman army. Their banner bore the name of Caesar, and their history carried the weight of conquest from Gaul to Jerusalem. They were not just fighters, they were masters of siege, engineers, and strategists, trained to exploit terrain, dismantle fortifications, and confront fanatical defenders. From urban alleys to fortified towns, from open battlefields to desert cliffs, they had honed their skills through years of relentless campaigns. The legion arrived in Judea armed with more than just shields and swords. The Romans brought with them an arsenal of precision tools designed for war: ballistae and scorpions, capable of firing bolts and stones with devastating speed and accuracy; battering rams, designed to crush walls that had withstood arrows, fire, and siege engines; and a corps of engineers, the Fabri, whose expertise ensured every piece of machinery, every construction project, and every logistical operation functioned seamlessly. These engineers were the backbone of Roman military power, often unsung, yet responsible for transforming plans into reality on a monumental scale. At the heart of their artillery was the ballista, a weapon that combined the ingenuity of Greek engineers with Roman standardization and mass production. Its origins lay in the Greek gastrophetes, the belly bow, scaled up over centuries into an engine of war. Roman engineers refined it further, replacing bending wooden limbs with torsion springs crafted from tightly twisted animal sinew. These sinew bundles stored incredible energy, releasing it in a sudden snap that could hurl bolts over 100 meters or stones weighing more than 20 kilograms. The machine could shoot almost in a straight line, making it remarkably precise, more akin to a sniper than a traditional catapult. Skilled crews could fire repeatedly, adjusting the angle and tension to maintain accuracy across varying distances and terrain. Weather and humidity were constant considerations. The Romans monitored the sinew's condition carefully, understanding that even slight changes could affect performance. The 10th Legion's approach to Masada was methodical. Silva did not rush into the cliffs blindly. He understood the risks, the terrain, and the defenders' resolve. The Sicarii were survivors, hardened by loss and fueled by fanatic determination. The Romans moved with purpose, deploying reconnaissance, supply chains, and protective formations as they descended into the Judean desert toward the mesa. As they approached, Silva faced the first problem: containment. A fortress like Masada could not be taken unless escape routes were sealed and reinforcements prevented from reaching the defenders. To accomplish this, the legion built 8 fortified camps around the mesa, each carefully positioned to block paths, control supply lines, and provide observation posts. The largest, Camp F, served as Silva's headquarters and the logistical heart of the operation. Each camp had specific duties: some guarded potential approaches, others managed supplies, and others held reserve forces ready to repel any attempt to relieve the fortress. Connecting these camps, the Romans constructed an 11-kilometer circumvallation wall, or limes, encircling the entire mesa. At 3 to 4 meters high and reinforced at regular intervals, it was tall enough to prevent breakout attempts and supported regular patrols. 15 watchtowers dotted the perimeter, providing a constant view of movement across the desert and ensuring that no defender could slip past undetected. Within weeks, the Romans had transformed the barren base of the mesa into a fully controlled, fortified zone. Even with containment secured, the fortress itself remained an imposing challenge. Its eastern and southern cliffs dropped sheer into the desert, and the Sicarii could defend the narrow paths with minimal effort. Silva's eyes turned west, where a natural ridge jutted out from the surrounding desert, offering the only plausible path for an assault. Though steep and difficult, this ridge, the so-called White Spur, would become the focus of one of Rome's most ambitious engineering operations. From this point, the Romans would begin their assault, combining sheer manpower with ingenuity, precision machinery, and the relentless discipline that had made Legio X Fretensis legendary. Even before the siege began in earnest, the stage was set. Silva's combination of containment, reconnaissance, and logistical preparation demonstrated the Roman approach to warfare: methodical, calculated, and patient. Every soldier, engineer, and artillery crew had a role, and every role was executed with meticulous precision. The Sicarii, perched on their cliffs, could see the approaching legions, their camps, and the artillery being deployed. They knew the Romans were organized, determined, and armed with weapons that could make even the impregnable cliffs seem vulnerable. And yet, for all their preparation, the Romans faced an obstacle unlike any they had previously encountered. The fortress of Masada was not just stone and earth, it was a fortress born of nature, ingenuity, and the unwavering will of those who defended it. The question remained, could even the mightiest legion overcome cliffs that had stopped empires, walls that had defied attackers for decades, and a people who would rather die than surrender? The answer, as Silva intended to demonstrate, lay not only in force but in ingenuity, engineering, and the relentless execution of strategy. With containment complete and the western ridge identified as the only feasible approach, the Romans embarked on a feat of engineering that would become legendary. Silva's engineers immediately began work on a massive siege ramp, a man-made causeway that would climb the cliffs of Masada. This was no ordinary construction project. The terrain was uneven, the slopes steep, and the defenders above relentless. Yet within days, the Romans turned the natural ridge into the foundation for a structure that would carry men, artillery, and even a towering siege engine to the very walls of the fortress. The ramp was a marvel of planning and execution. It rose approximately 60 meters from the desert floor to the plateau, stretching between 200 and 600 meters in length. Workers used every available material: packed earth, rubble, and large stones, reinforced by wooden supports carefully placed to maintain stability. Legionaries labored in shifts, rotating to endure the punishing heat of the Judean desert. Above them, the Sicarii hurled rocks, firebrands, and arrows, attempting to halt construction. Yet the Roman soldiers advanced methodically, protected by mobile shields and mantlets that absorbed the blows and allowed work to continue. Archaeological surveys confirmed that the ramp's slope and dimensions matched historical accounts, an enduring testament to Roman organization and skill. Once the ramp reached the desired height, Silva turned his attention to the crown jewel of the assault, the siege tower. 18 meters tall, heavily reinforced, and wrapped in iron plates, the tower was designed to withstand fire, falling debris, and defensive counterattacks. Its multiple floors accommodated archers, engineers, and artillery crews. The tower was not only a tool of destruction but a moving fortress of its own, a platform from which Roman troops could dominate the battlefield almost on eye level with Masada's defenders. Transporting the tower up the ramp required extraordinary coordination. Hundreds of legionaries worked in unison, using wooden rollers, ropes, and winches to inch the massive structure forward. Engineers constantly inspected the ground beneath, shoring up weak points and adjusting angles to prevent collapse. Any misstep could have led to disaster: a tipping tower, crushed soldiers, and the loss of months of labor. Yet the Romans, trained in patience and discipline, advanced steadily, inch by painstaking inch. At the summit, the tower became a platform for Rome's most advanced weapons. Ballistae, mounted on reinforced floors, were positioned with surgical precision. These engines could launch bolts over 40 meters long and stones weighing 20 to 30 kilograms. Each projectile smashed into the fortress walls with devastating force, forcing the defenders into cover and disrupting their defenses. Above them, scorpions, smaller, faster bolt throwers, picked off defenders who dared to expose themselves, creating a relentless storm of fire. The tower itself was almost impervious to counterattack. Its exterior was draped in wet hides to extinguish fire before it could spread. Iron plating protected against falling stones and projectiles. Archers inside the tower kept watch, ready to intercept anyone attempting to approach or set it ablaze. Behind the main structure, additional ballistae were deployed on reinforced platforms, targeting the higher battlements and upper walls. Adjustments were made constantly, angles tweaked, tension recalibrated, and ammunition replenished in a rhythm that resembled a factory more than a battlefield. The psychological effect on the defenders was profound. From atop the walls, the Sicarii watched as the ramp and tower rose steadily. Every stone thrown at the attackers met with counterfire. Every arrow loosed against the Roman crews was answered with bolts and stones from above. The fortress, which had seemed untouchable, now faced the full force of Roman ingenuity and discipline. The combination of engineering, artillery, and coordinated manpower had transformed the previously impossible climb into a battlefield the Romans controlled. The Romans understood that the siege was as much about morale as it was about physical destruction. The constant bombardment sapped the will of the defenders even before the first legionary set foot on the plateau. Masada had withstood years of rebellion and natural defenses, but the systematic, relentless assault from the west left the Sicarii with fewer options and mounting pressure. Every shot from the ballistae and scorpions chipped away not only at walls but at confidence, forcing the defenders to fight on multiple fronts simultaneously, against gravity, artillery, and the unstoppable march of Roman engineering. The ramp and tower stood as symbols of Rome's capacity to adapt, innovate, and apply discipline to the most daunting challenges. They were more than tools. They were an embodiment of strategy, patience, and coordination, bringing the might of the empire directly to the cliffs that had never been scaled. For the Sicarii, the sight of the Romans inching their siege tower up the ramp must have been both awe-inspiring and terrifying, a tangible demonstration of how far ingenuity could extend the reach of human will in war. And so, as the tower finally reached the top of the ramp, poised near the walls of Masada, the stage was set. The Romans had brought their deadliest tools to bear, combining the precision of artillery with the relentless determination of thousands of soldiers. The fortress that had defied empires now faced a weaponized platform of engineering mastery, ready to deliver destruction with terrifying efficiency. The siege of Masada had entered a decisive phase, and the Sicarii's fate was hanging in the balance. After a relentless week of bombardment from ballistae and scorpions, the outer walls of Masada began to tremble under the constant assault. Stone and timber cracked and splintered as the torsion-powered bolts and dense projectiles struck with unyielding force. Dust clouds rose into the sky, drifting across the cliffs as defenders scrambled to maintain their positions. Yet despite the devastation, the Sicarii held firm, using every defensive advantage the fortress offered. The walls had been breached, but the final challenge awaited the Romans. The human element, the zealots themselves, whose courage and conviction would prove as formidable as stone. Silva, seasoned by years of campaigns across Judea, understood the danger. A broken wall could be a trap. At Jotapata, Gamla, and Jerusalem, defenders had funneled attackers into deadly choke points, poured boiling oil on advancing soldiers, and set ambushes that decimated Roman columns. Even with walls shattered, the fortress could still conceal lethal surprises. He ordered his men to pause, to assess, and to prepare for any eventuality. The legionaries, disciplined and trained in the slow, methodical tactics of siege warfare, moved cautiously. Shields raised, formation tight, they advanced into the breach at first light, eyes scanning every chamber, doorway, and stairwell. Engineers inspected the rubble, centurions guided squads deeper into the fortress, and every soldier knew the stakes. One mistake could be fatal. As the Romans penetrated deeper into Masada, the silence became unnerving. There were no battle cries, no clash of steel, only the faint echo of distant rocks and the wind across the mesa. Then, moving through the inner chambers, the legionaries discovered the truth. Hundreds of men, women, and children were huddled together, silent, their faces pale, eyes wide with fear and resignation. The Sicarii had made a deliberate choice, one that the Romans could hardly have anticipated. Eleazar ben Yair, the leader of the Sicarii, had addressed his people the night before. His words, as recorded later, were clear and unflinching. They would not be enslaved by the Romans. Freedom, even in death, was worth more than life under chains. Families gathered together, and lots were cast to select 10 men responsible for carrying out a grim task, ending the lives of their kin. One by one, fathers, sons, and brothers followed the lot, fulfilling the pact with stoic resolve. Finally, the last survivor drew lots again, and the last man, chosen by fate, turned the sword upon himself, completing the act of collective defiance. When the Romans entered the inner chambers, they found no fighters, no final clash of arms, only the aftermath of an extraordinary and tragic decision. 2 women and 5 children remained, hidden deep within the cisterns, trembling and whispering the story of the night before. Archaeologists and historians later confirmed the scene. Nearly 960 men, women, and children had chosen death over captivity, leaving the fortress eerily silent, despite having survived the physical destruction. The Roman soldiers, despite their years of combat and familiarity with the brutal realities of war, would have felt the weight of what they encountered. The Sicarii's choice was deliberate, organized, and unyielding, a testament to the power of ideology and resolve in shaping history. The walls of Masada, once thought impenetrable, had been breached by Roman ingenuity and engineering, yet it was the human spirit within that left the most enduring impression. In the immediate aftermath, Silva's legion undertook the systematic clearing of the fortress. Siege engines were dismantled, iron and timber salvaged, and the site catalogued. Burned beams, shattered masonry, and collapsed structures bore witness to the Roman assault, while the decision of the Sicarii resonated as an act of profound, tragic defiance. The fortress itself had been subdued, yet it left behind a story that would echo through history, a place where human determination met technological mastery, and where the will of a people shaped the final moments of a rebellion. With the fortress finally silent, the Romans began the process of consolidation and documentation. Soldiers moved cautiously through the shattered walls and collapsed towers, inspecting the ruins, salvaging iron and timber, and recording the deployment of their siege engines. Burned beams, crushed masonry, and the remnants of ballista bolts and stones bore witness to the sheer scale of the assault. Archaeological evidence confirms that the ramp, the siege tower, and the artillery left physical marks across the cliffs of Masada, silent reminders of the engineering genius that had brought an impregnable fortress to its knees. Yet the true story of Masada was not merely in the destruction wrought by Roman machines. It lay in the extraordinary human resolve of the Sicarii. Nearly 1,000 men, women, and children had chosen death over captivity, refusing to submit to Roman chains. Their act was deliberate, collective, and chillingly methodical. Parents had ended the lives of their children, siblings had dispatched one another, and finally, the last survivor took his own life to complete the pact. The fortress had not fallen through force of arms alone, it had fallen because the defenders refused to live under the conqueror's rule. It was a stark reminder that in war, the human will can rival any engine or weapon. For the Romans, even victory carried weight. Silva's legion had subdued the final bastion of Jewish resistance, yet they encountered not the triumphant cries of captives but the silence of a people who had dictated their own fate. It was a somber conclusion to a campaign defined as much by strategy and engineering as by courage and sacrifice. Roman historians, particularly Josephus, marveled at the ingenuity displayed on both sides, the relentless discipline of the attackers, and the unwavering commitment of the defenders. Masada had become a stage on which human determination and technological mastery intersected, producing a story as haunting as it was legendary. The fortress itself, though conquered, would endure in memory as a symbol of defiance and resilience. It was no longer simply a mesa of stone, it had become an enduring emblem of courage against overwhelming odds. Generations of historians, military strategists, and engineers would study Masada as a case study in siegecraft and the human cost of war. The lessons were profound. Meticulous planning, innovative engineering, and disciplined execution could overcome the seemingly impossible. Yet no technology, no matter how advanced, could compel submission when the defenders were determined to die on their own terms. Masada's legacy extends beyond military history. It is a story of human spirit, of freedom valued above life itself, and of the unbreakable will that can shape events even against a global superpower. The ruins of the fortress, still visible today, are a silent testament to both the ingenuity of the Romans and the courage of the Sicarii. Each collapsed wall and scattered stone speaks to a clash not just of armies, but of philosophies: domination versus self-determination, conquest versus resistance. In the end, the story of Masada reminds us that history is shaped not only by weapons and armies but by the choices of individuals and communities. The Romans, with their standardized artillery, massive siege towers, and unrelenting discipline, demonstrated the apex of military engineering. The Sicarii, with their resolve and unity, demonstrated the power of human will. Together, these forces created a moment that echoes through the centuries, a story of strategy, ingenuity, desperation, and honor that continues to captivate, inspire, and haunt those who study it. And so, Masada stands in history as both a warning and a marvel, a fortress that defied empires, a rebellion that refused to bend, and a testament to the extraordinary lengths to which people will go to preserve their freedom, even in the face of inevitable defeat. The cliffs, the walls, the ramp, and the tower may crumble with time, but the story endures, a narrative of human courage, Roman ingenuity, and the haunting final act of a people who chose death over submission.